So much expertise in this audience, and they come from all parts of the world. And there are different views on the role of the state, and I'm well aware of that. And I'd like to ask the front row a few questions in addition to what you've heard already. And the first one is Harry Vollaert. Are you amongst us, Harry? And final row is the first row then, from here. Am I right that you're working for a mainstream bank in the Netherlands, the Rabobank? Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Mike, let's hand it over to you.
We actually support We Helpen.
Yeah, you're one of the system banks in this small country, but you're not small as a bank at all. You're involved in this community currency thing, or complementary currency thing. Why are you involved in wehelpen.nl?
We are a cooperative bank, so we have a member bank, and one of the issues what's currently going on is well, social welfare is a very important topic for our members, and I think the system, like we or coin designed, the credit system and the Makkie really helps to raise the social welfare in the cities as well in the rural areas. So that's why we support We Helpen.
Yeah, so you invest in it, and on the same hand you try to see what's happening in this experimental area, for you experimental area probably, or what is the opinion within your bank, within your colleagues, amongst your colleagues about this experiment for you? What do they say if you start talking with them about this?
Well, it really links to our roots as a cooperative bank.
Yeah.
So it really resonates within our bank, and especially when I talk with my colleagues, I definitely get and agree on what I'm doing with We Helpen. We Helpen is an independent organization, by the way, and the Rabobank is a member of it. So it's not a part of the Rabobank itself, but it's an independent organization.
And when you started invested in We Helpen, did you kind of have some return on investment demands?
No, not at all. Well, I'm from an innovation department, so we are not working with ROIs. So and I think it's also well, long-term investment. Maybe that's not the right word, but you have to see how it develops, and not working directly with all kind of metrics. So it seems to work quite well, so I'm very happy about it.
Great. Thanks very much, Harry. A second person who is amongst us, as far as I know, is Hamish Jenkins. Hamish, are you with us? Hamish. Sorry, we haven't shaken hands yet. Hi. You work for the UN, United Nations, NGLS, trying to improve the relationship between the United Nations on the one hand and civil society on the other hand. Am I correct? Yes?
Yeah, that's about it.
Does this make sense for an organization like a policy organization like the UN, being in this thing of community currencies? What would you say?
Well, I think this is the right time to build that relationship. I mean, our role as NGLS is to help new innovative ideas that are underrepresented in the in the series of voices from civil society that try to get heard at the UN. And this is really cutting edge. I mean, we had a special session in which many participants were present during a conference that we organized on the potentials and limits of the solidarity economy as a kind of new development model that's much more based on cooperation, mutual support, complementarity of economic activities instead of the conventional model of competition and profit maximization. And then within that context, especially in this period of crisis, but clearly this, as many emphasize, this is not only a crisis mitigation measure, it can really provide a number of new tools out of the box thinking that that deserves to be heard at the UN. So there are many ways in which one can find entry points from an economic point of view, whether it's to better use excess capacity, whether it is to try and rebalance the current economic system that for the moment has really put the global movement of goods, services, finance at the expense of the local. And as Bernard said, there's this tendency of destroying local communities, which is bad economically, socially, but also politically can lead to a huge backlash that could be reminiscent of the 1930s.
And was it you who sent a call to the world to open up to this topic of community currencies and complementary currencies? Am I right?
Well, it was partly the result of a few agencies who had participated at the People's Summit at the Rio +20 conference last year, where clearly among the different messages that were coming out, the need for a new economic model based on a solidarity economy and practical tools such as complementary currencies seemed the most cutting edge ideas that were coming out. So in cooperation with a research institute of the UN, we launched a call for papers, and then within that we included the possibility for people to come forth with ideas on alternative finance and complementary currencies.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. Thanks, Hamish.
You're welcome.
A person who's next to you is very experienced in this field. Annette Riggs, I'm glad you could come.
Thank you.
Yeah, second
Good to
time we
see you.
meet. Yeah.
Mhm.
You're president of the ERTA, IRTA, am I right?
Yes.
Yes. And this year you're having your 34th annual conference in Las Vegas. First time in Las Vegas probably, but
Yes, and no, it's not the first time in Las Vegas, but that's the International Reciprocal Trade Association, which is the association for business to business barter trade systems. Barter's kind of a misnomer term because they're really private currencies. In Tom's language, he often uses credit clearing between businesses, and that's very much what we do using a private currency. And ERTA is the association that began to support these exchanges, particularly in the U.S., but they were really starting all over the world. And so it's been an international association to support in terms of policy. In 1982, we faced the government in terms of really looking at closing down trade exchanges and these business private currencies because they were not being reported as income. So ERTA was very key in that time, and really it all happened in 1982, to work with the government and the IRS to become third-party record keepers. So it really legitimized our industry and made it acceptable. And a lot of people thought that, our value was in being an underground economy, but really what it turned out was that we had many more business participate because they didn't have the fear of the IRS or the government, or whether it was legal or if it was gray area or not gray area. It was established that it was acceptable form of commerce, and it was accepted by the government. And the TEFRA Act, which Ron Whitney, our executive director, will be talking about in a session today, created what has become a long-term partnership. So I think one of the things that we can offer is that this kind of cooperation and working with, it really helps us to move forward and build and grow and scale these systems.
thank you very much. How much systems do you know globally are under the ERTA?
Well, in ERTA, the membership is a little over 100, but there's many more than that in terms of just this particular business-to-business exchange process, which is one sector of many, all of these other new and emerging ideas. This is kind of the historical model in the business community that's been around for going on 40 years now.
And to you, coming from the US, having worked in the US, like your neighbor, Thomas Greco, by the way, welcome. US, of course, has a different relation between society on the one hand and their government on the other hand than Europe and Asia have. Would you think they're the enemy, like you told in the story about the early 80s? Or would there be some field of joint development during the next few decades on this topic? What do you think?
Well, I think having some form of cooperation and working with our policy and legislative leaders is really important, because we're being faced now with, we have the situation with the Bangla Pesa and other currencies that are being challenged by authorities. It happened with Banco de Palmas in Brazil. And once the central banks understood the value to these communities and the value of these systems, they ended up supporting it. But it appears, you know, from all the different people that I collaborate with and correspond with, that the more kind of fear there is about, well, they're going to shut us down, and you know, there's a lot of that going on with Bitcoin and the money transmitters and that kind of thing too, and that's where it ends up being targeted, because they're underground, they're secretive, they get fearful that it's about money laundering, that there's criminal activity going on. So I think transparency, cooperation, and partnership is critically important for these systems to be successful.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna. Your neighbor, Thomas,
Yes.
you're acknowledged as one of the eye-openers for many people in the world through your books, like The End of Money. If I would ask you a similar question, you coming from the US, having worked there for a long time, publishing there, the relationship with government and governmental aims and the future of society on the one hand, and the community currency or complementary currency on the other hand. Would you give a similar example, like transparency is key, or could you add something to that?
Well, I agree with Annette that I think we have to deal with the power structure that exists. Historically, we've seen a lot of instances of government resistance to innovative kinds of things, like complementary currencies that empower people and communities. And it was referred to in the performance earlier this morning in the case of Vorgel. Vorgel was shut down by the government at the behest of the central bank because they saw it as a competing medium of exchange, which put the banks out of the picture. And that is the potential for complementary currency and exchange systems, is to really transcend money and banking as we've known it. Especially as we zero in on the kinds of currency designs that can really have a major effect in empowering people and communities. And that's a major point that I'd like to make if I have this opportunity to do it. We have lots of different designs of complementary currencies. Some are sold for cash. They become a cash substitute. It's a way of capturing some of the pounds or the dollars or the euros to recirculate in the local community. Some are given out as merchant rebates. But the most powerful way of creating a currency is to spend it into circulation. This is a way of monetizing the local value added. We can create local liquidity in our local communities by using what we produce and monetizing the value of that product in the form of our own currency. Creating liquidity in this way really doesn't require the participation of banks. It doesn't require that you have any money. And this is the way it's going now, and this is what complementary credit clearing exchanges do. So that's why I've been very vigorous in pushing for credit clearing exchanges.
It's amazing. I see a disruptive path during the next few decades. Enter the business of banks and state income.
Well, exactly. And one of my favorite books of the last 15 years or so is Clayton Christensen's book, The Innovator's Dilemma.
It's my favorite.
And he talks about disruptive technologies.
I know.
And you can see that very plainly in the case of digital photography. digital photography initially underperformed film and chemicals. And at that time, who was on the top of the pyramid in photography and imaging?
By the way, I think you all should have read it once in your life, this book that Thomas is mentioning, The Innovator's Dilemma, Harvard Press. I think it was from 1998 or something.
Somewhere around there. I think it was actually around 2000, 2001.
Okay.
But there might have been an earlier
Written by
edition.
Clayton Christensen. He says what happens when novel, different value-based technologies or ways of working and doing come up in society. And you have a neighbor, and he comes from Catalonia. Am I right?
You're right. Good
Thank
morning.
you. Good morning. Thank you very much having you here. Fine to have you here. And I was told, Jordi Griera, that you are not only a thinker and a professor in, amongst others, business strategy, but you aim personally to partly replace the euro in Catalonia with a different currency. Am I right? And why? If yes, why would you want to do that?
Well, the answer is yes. It's one of our projects. And the reason is that there is a liquidity crunch in Catalonia, as it is in most of Southern Europe. I would say all of Europe, but mostly Southern Europe. Catalonia is no exception. So one way to increase liquidity is to provide an alternative money. How do you do this? The problem is that there is a resistance, because economists, even with the best faith, they don't understand the multiplicity of currencies. So how do you convince them? I tell them that 20th century was the age of centralization. You know, one Europe, one central bank, one television, but usually just one big telephone company for a country. But now we are in the age of mobile phones. We are in the age of the internet. We are a viral age. Television, no, YouTube. Everybody is broadcasting. So it's the same for currency. The central currency belongs to the past, belongs to the 20th century. This is the age, 21st century, is the age of the multiplicity of currencies in a viral way. And people are getting the message. So we are talking to political parties. They like the idea because we want to build consensus. This has to be absolutely transversal to the economy and to society. So first we are putting into the bandwagon all the political parties. They like it. We talk to economists. That's a bit more difficult for the reasons mentioned. But economists, like all of us, just would try to help their country. And they understand that money is not neutral at all, opposite to what they had been told at school. So that's it. We will go ahead little by little. We think of 3 layers. One will be the euro, which we need a global currency for dealing with other countries. There will be a Catalonian currency, and also we have the local currencies with different concepts, different varieties. Each one has to have its own particularity.
And is there anyone on the couch who'd like to comment on that?
It's the social value as well behind this, which is community currencies allow you to place a worth and a value, and they're slightly different things in political mindsets of lots of things that go on in societies that often don't get valued. That's why we're very interested in time banking, valuing people's time.
Absolutely.
Just as an example, in the United Kingdom, carers, people who look after elderly or people who are disabled, they're what's called the hidden National Health Service, because they save the public purse huge amounts of money. It's kind of just as a metaphor for lots of things we don't value because the currency doesn't place a value on it, and the way we do business has public sector organisations doesn't place a value on it. So that's why the community currency, the Brixton pound, the municipal currency starts to stretch into the non-monetary and placing a worth and a value, or value to give worth to the contribution. That's fascinating for me, and that's where we want to extend it in Lambeth.
Several of the comments related directly and indirectly to the issue of power, in fact. Today, particularly, we have been seeing something rather blatant. The banking system gets in trouble on an unprecedented huge scale. Governments have to save them. Otherwise, everything stops. That's what we learned in the 1930s. Government suddenly, when everything is done, then the financial sector comes back and says, now you're too indebted. You have to get rid of everything else. Okay? The next step, who is actually in charge, is the question. And it has to do with democracy, it has to do with power. And the message for the political arena is the following. Why is it that, say, the pound in England, the euro on the continent, is the dominant currency? And why was it the Dutch guilder, in Holland before? And the answer is very simple. Government, the sovereign government, chooses which currency it wants to accept in taxes. The taxes, as we've been told, are supposedly necessary to fund the government. And the metaphor usually used is a family, okay? No, all governments are like a family or not. And I claim they're not. Because the power is in the government that says, I will accept bank debt money for payment of taxes, or something else, and that gives the power to whatever you are accepting to power, as money. The reason that the dominant currency is dominant is because that's what government imposes on everybody to pay in taxes. So the power of taxes, the real purpose, is to give value to a currency that has none intrinsically. All right? That's the systemic purpose of it. So policymakers should understand this. Because if we continue stuck with the single currency idea coming from bank debt, we're giving the power to a lobby that has absolutely no relationship with democracy and the values that we're standing for. So the real power is there, but governments don't use it. And I'm delighted to know that Lambeth is actually breaking that pattern. There were 2 cases in Japan in the 90s. You're the 3rd one I know of. So that's the direction for government. And by the way I look at it, we shouldn't really say accept only another currency. Obviously we have a transition period, and when you went to build diversity, the first thing to do is not to get rid of what you have. So I'm not talking about getting rid of the banking system, but we just say get rid of what's monopoly. And the real power is, what do you decide in payment of taxes? And I'm delighted that the continent is finally getting that message. And the same message is true for you.
I really like to add a practical layer after all this theory and ideas, which I really support and like. The point is, I think, that we have to understand that we do not have to wait. We can start now. There's a lot of frameworks, legal frameworks, knowledge is there. There are a lot of books which explain how you have to do it. There's a lot of software there, a lot of it is for free, by the way, which you can download and you can start. There's a lot of ideas on how you do co-creation or marketing or empowerment or whatever you like to do, depending on the type of currency that you need. It's all there. It's for you there to grab and to start. And I think we should be, as group here, we should be the advocates going into the world, making sure that we have a whole new explosion of these type of currencies, so we can collectively learn, we can collectively share, and we can improve them to a much higher level.
Okay, hearing that, my question would immediately be, who on top of this is monitoring what's happening, and is it a collective learning process that we're in? And do we know about the 3 cases there, apart from being in one man's head? I mean, is there an internet site? Is there a jointly learning program globally? Who does this?
I think I'm one of the people that would be able to answer this. So on this moment, there is a research group which is creating a website which will be multilingual, which is basically using a lot of the existing sources but bringing them to one place. It will have 2 URLs, communitycurrency.org and complementarycurrency.org, which is currently run by Steven de Meulenare. He's also involved in this one. This group is around, say, 15 people at the moment, and we will try to have as complete as possible overview in a database of all systems that are there.
And who pays them?
You mean who pays for this whole thing?
Yeah, for this site monitoring?
So the out-of-pocket is done by the EU. It's part of the Community Currencies in Action program, which is the European project, and around 6 systems are paid by that, but including the costs for this one.
Can systems from Latin America, Africa and Asia Pacific join?
Yes.
As well? Yes?
They can use the same infrastructure. And most of the time, which is in there, is, to be honest, is unpaid. It's people that are really nuts about the subject and like to give a lot of information there and that are going to fail. So you will not only find this database, you will find a wiki with 500 plus pages which are explaining concepts or what we call mechanics or the way things work, or we will have books there and how to start up, we will have videos. So there's a lot of information on that website, and we expect to have this ready somewhere later this year. There will be a working group, I hope, in this weekend, which is fully focusing on this subject.
Good. But isn't this a United Nations thing?
Well, it depends whether whether your philosophy is top down or bottom up.
You're a bottom-up organization, aren't you?
Well, maybe if at some, what I wouldn't like is that the UN initiates the kind of work that that this coalition of civil society groups have put together. If at some point this kind of platform can interface with the UN and deal with a number of issues, whether we're talking about regulation, about being able to explain the economic, social, environmental benefits of this and provide therefore some kind of legitimizing platform, why not? But we really have to build it step by step from a bottom-up process. I mean, one question I'd like to interject is, I mean, hearing the discussions over the last couple of days, including the fact that some of our good friends from Kenya were arrested. This is not new. I've heard this an incident in Ecuador even more recently. I don't have the details of, but it does raise the question that when we're looking at entry points into the UN, we can think of the social, the economic, the environmental. But maybe at the bottom of all this is the question of whether well-designed, democratically governed complementary currency systems, are they or are they not a collective human right? That's a question I would like to pose.
It's a great question. Thank you very much for that. I would like to ask you to hand over the microphone to the lady who's in the back of you, and she's coming from Belgium, and her name is Suzy Maas. Do I pronounce it correctly?
Suzy, yes.
Suzy. And you're working on an entirely different scale of abstraction. You seem to manage to establish a community currency that's fully integrating shops. Am I right or am I wrong?
Integrating shops.
Yeah.
Yes, we will try it. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And could you tell why you do it and how you do it?
Yes, I was also a councillor past 6 years in Turnhout, in a city of 40,000 persons, citizens. And my experience is that the cost of aging and retired people will be enormously in the next future. So that's the reason why I think that complementary currency and social currency will be one of the solutions to help to solve the problem. So we start social currency in Turnhout. We are supported by the Flemish government, and I think it can also be, it can only be sustainable if also small enterprises will help us to have a business model that is sustainable. So that's the reason why we will involve also small enterprises and retailers.
And how do you get shops in this system? I mean, a bakery or a hairdresser, or how do you do that?
That's we have to start with it. So yeah.
Any
We're
advice
not so
for
far.
this lady?
We're not so far at the moment. Yeah.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much for that. I can take it from you. Thank you, Susie. We have another man amongst us, and his name is Arjo Klamer, and I do not know him personally. Arjo, hi. You're a professor at Erasmus University of Rotterdam, am I right?
That's right.
And you have been asked to do some research on the effectiveness, both economically and socially, as far as I know.
That was the idea, yeah.
Of this new wave of community currencies. Could you kind of highlight the main points of your research outcome?
Yeah, that's. I should also add that the main work was done by Lotte Boonstra, but we built on work we have been doing within cultural economics to find other ways of assessing processes like currencies. As also has been argued, many of these currencies, except for the barter kind of currencies where you talk, which have mainly, you could say, economic purposes, generating transactions that otherwise would not take place or making them easier. Many currencies have social purposes, like also the Brixton pound, and so to also the Makkie, to sort of contribute to the community. The only problem is, how do you evaluate that? And that's the method that we are trying to develop, is how you sort of can evaluate the social outcomes. And that's really sort of pioneering work right now, because we are operating in an instrumentalist age where everything boils down to whatever can be quantified, and we use money for that purpose. So that we can all do very well, and we are very sophisticated in quantifying everything, making everything financial. But the most important things that really count and really matter in the end in our lives, Bernard already pointed out, but we're social beings, so we want to realize social values. Those we cannot count, and don't we can measure. So we are trying to sort of do so, and that's tough. But what we are finding then, if you put it really to that standard, then, and that's the dilemma I am in. I really support, as an economist, these initiatives. I completely agree with Bernard Littauer's argument that we are needing another sort of economy more based on diversity. I really think that the alternative to what the monocurrency systems that we have now is a system of multiple currencies. But I think if you really take a tough look at current experiments, you end up, let's say, if you have that, at least that hope, disappointed. That the currencies don't, if you take a really tough look at it, that they don't really do what we are hoping they are doing. They don't realize as much of the social values that we would like them to realize. That it's hard to sustain them. With all the effort we put in it, the outcomes are limited. Now, and I'm here in a dilemma, because supporting it, I also, if I'm sort of taking a more scientific view at it, then the results are not all that great. And we're finding out that it's very hard to sustain, to circulate the currencies, to get them, it's not so easy, difficult to issue them, but to get them to people to use them. They build up credits and then don't spend it. We find often if the purposes are social, as soon as the relationships are settled, then people don't feel the need for the currency anymore. And we also discovered that this sense of ownership is very critical. That currencies are introduced by organizations that really stand for it, but then people don't adopt them as their own. That's sort of, so basically what we come out in this research is that it is good to, I mean, I understand Edgar's argument, let's go and let's do it, and I understand this sort of activism, but there is also danger that you're overselling it. And that is what I was the day before yesterday, was in discussion with the political leader of the Socialist Party here in the Netherlands, the leftist party, I mean, your kind of guy. And I said, I was talking about this, and I said, well, have you thought about it? He looked at me together with his financial guy and said, yes, but, and we find it interesting, but don't count on us bringing that into the political discussion, because that would make us a laughing stock. At this moment, it is not, as a politician, something that I can bring in. I'm not sure what your experience is, but it's very risky for them. Even though they are sympathetic and they think they agree, but they find it hard, and that has something to do with what I brought earlier. Is if it shows results, and you can really make it sound like, hey, there's something going on. But I do think that we need to take a harder look at what really is that is being accomplished here, and to have also be realistic about it, to see what the challenges they really face.
Okay,
and
thank you very much. Our time is narrow. Thank you very much. Either we haven't found the dominant design yet, or the claims are wrong, or the time isn't right, or whatever. But 2 seats to your right, there's a man called Igor Bitterbier. And he's one of the founders of a local currency in the city of Ghent, in Belgium, the Toricus. What's your opinion if you hear Arjo saying, well, we haven't reached the level of greatness yet with this phenomena?
Yes, I'm not one of the founders. It's an initiative by the city of Ghent, officially.
Excuse me.
But I agree in general terms that we mustn't focus too much on the instrument currency, and that we have to combine it, or maybe switch the focus of the attention to the aim, to the goal, build and the community around that, and then see the currency as the instrument and make that as efficient as possible. The Toricus are going very well. It started October 2011. It's on a very local area, so 8,000 people living in that specific difficult area. It's going well, but once again, if we look at the issues on do people use it and how do they use it and why do they use it, I think the message is quite crucial, and the community building around it is quite crucial. And I agree that we're also preparing the Forturno, so the time to care Troeven. And we are really looking now at how to build a lasting business model, and trying to find clever ways, let's say, to realize that economy that is sustainable also on the economical level. So I agree on that.
You agree
I
on
agree.
it?
Yeah.
So time is up, ladies and gentlemen. I have one very personal question to you. It's about my own currency that I'm about to launch with, amongst others, Herman, who is there, in about 1.5 weeks in the city of Rotterdam. And my principal question to you is, do you think it's principally possible for such a local currency to fly towards about, say, 10 to 20,000 bank accounts in about 5 years? What would be your answer, yes or no? Could such a currency go to... It's meant for small businesses. It's a mutual credit clearing system. Is it principally possible or impossible, yes, or is it possible, yes or no, to go towards 10 or 20,000 bank accounts in 5 years? What would you say? If it's demurrage, yes. Yes, principally yes. Jordi, yes. Miguel, yes. Am I right, Miguel? Yes. Who says no? So Arjo, it's just a matter of time. Thank you very much for your attention.